Welcome, curious minds, to another deep dive. Today we're navigating a profound and often pretty unsettling topic. It sits right at the intersection of justice, youth, and, well, human fallibility. Our journey kicks off with a name that, for many, still really resonates with outrage and sorrow. George Stinney Jr. He was just 14 years old, 14, when he was sent to the electric chair back in 1944. That made him the youngest person executed in America in the 20th century. His conviction, famously brief, just 10 minutes long, was overturned 7 decades later. But this is crucial, not because new evidence proved his innocence, but because he simply never received a fair trial. We've pulled together a whole stack of sources for this deep dive, everything from legal analyses and psychological studies to some raw online discussions and deeply personal testimonies. Our mission today: to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge from all this material. We want to give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed on this vital and honestly evolving subject. We'll unpack the Stinney case, explore how our understanding of juvenile culpability has shifted, and then take a hard look at that lasting Peter Pan shadow of wrongful conviction, even after someone's exonerated.
Yeah, it's quite striking, isn't it, how the Stinney case, even though it's decades old, it just keeps highlighting these systemic issues that, frankly, persist in our justice system today. So this deep dive isn't just about, historical injustices. It's also about the ongoing challenges for individuals caught in the system now, and what the latest research tells us about the very nature of adolescence itself when it kind of intersects with the law.
Absolutely. So let's peel back the layers, shall we? We're going to move from the stark realities of the past through the really significant shifts in legal and scientific understanding, right into the present-day realities of those who have actually navigated the justice system as children. Okay, so to really grasp the systemic issues we're talking about, we have to journey back to this single, haunting case. George Stinney Jr. His story isn't just some historical footnote. It's a pretty stark illustration of everything that can go wrong. So let's pull back the curtain on the core facts that defined his brief life and ultimately the injustice he faced. Stinney was 14, executed in South Carolina in 1944 for the murders of 2 young white girls, Betty June Binnicker, who was 11, and Mary Emma Thames, just 7. His trial, like we said, astonishingly brief, only 10 minutes. And the exoneration came 70 years later, 2014, but not because of new evidence proving innocence, but because the court determined he just hadn't received a fair trial. Plain and simple. As one source put it, he was railroaded on flimsy evidence. The whole case was just full of conflicting accounts. You had the investigator claiming George admitted to it, led them to the weapon. But then George himself claimed he was starved, bribed with food to confess. And there were other claims floating around, too, from locals. One saying his black teacher said he was violent. Another woman reported he'd threatened to murder her just days before. It's messy.
And what's crucial to understand here is that while shocking, the Stinney case wasn't totally isolated for its time in the U.S., which really begs the question: how common was the execution of juveniles historically in America? I mean, the sources point to cases like Hannah Aquish, a 12-year-old Native American girl hanged in Connecticut way back in 1786, or James Racine, a Cherokee man, executed in Arkansas in 1885 for a crime he committed when he was just 10 years old. 10. And even much more recently, like as late as 1999, Oklahoma executed a white male for a crime committed at age 16. So yeah, our attitudes about what constitutes an adult have definitely shifted, but that change hasn't been, uniform across history.
And digging even deeper into the Stinney case specifically, the sources bring up some pretty unsettling speculation about an alternate suspect. George Washington Burke Jr. He was the son of a wealthy white businessman who, get this, also happened to be the foreman of the grand jury that indicted Stinney. Yeah. The theory suggests Burke Sr. might have helped frame Stinney to protect his own son. Apparently, the son was known as a womanizer, someone who often got away with things like theft.
So that theory, I mean, if it holds any water, it just profoundly underscores how intertwined issues of race and social standing could be in these kinds of outcomes.
Right. So given these stark historical examples, it's pretty clear our societal views on youth and crime have thankfully evolved quite dramatically. Yeah. How has this changing understanding specifically influenced the application of, say, capital punishment for juveniles here in the U.S.?
That shifting perspective is absolutely central. Yeah, think about it. Less than 100 years ago, things like child labor, even child brides, were, acceptable in society. So this broader societal shift, this recognition of adolescence as a distinct developmental stage with its own unique characteristics, that played a huge role in the legal changes that followed. The U.S. Supreme Court's 2005 decision in Roper v. Simmons, that was a true landmark. It ruled that the 8th and 14th Amendments forbid the death penalty for offenders who were under 18 when they committed their crimes. And the court's decision, it didn't just, come out of thin air. It relied heavily on psychological and sociological studies. It emphasized three key points about juveniles. First, their, quote, lack of maturity and underdeveloped sense of responsibility. This directly affects their decision making, right? It leads to them being overrepresented in reckless behavior. Second, they're just more vulnerable to negative influences, to peer pressure. And they often lack the real freedom to get themselves out of what the court called criminogenic settings, basically, environments that foster crime. And third, and this is important, they have a greater capacity for reform. Their identities are just far less fixed than adults.
And that decision really brought the U.S. much more in line with global norms, didn't it? Sources point out that as recently as 2003, only the United States and Iran were still imposing death sentences on juveniles.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating, because even then, Iran's judiciary was apparently drafting a bill to raise their minimum age from 15 to 18. And many countries the U.S. often criticizes for human rights abuses had already abolished the practice.
Exactly. And if you look specifically at Iran's situation, even after that time, Amnesty International recorded 73 executions of juvenile offenders just between 2005 and 2015. Some of those kids were as young as 12 when the offense happened. And these cases, they frequently involved denial of legal access, serious allegations of torture to get confessions, trials in adult courts. Even when a new Islamic penal code came in 2013 that allowed judges some discretion, to replace the death penalty if the juvenile didn't seem to comprehend the crime or if their mental maturity was in doubt. Well, assessments made years after the crime were often considered inherently unreliable. And then there's the practice of blood money dire, where victims' families can pardon offenders for money, which often leads to these agonizing last-minute stays of execution. That itself is considered cruel and inhuman treatment.
So the legal landscape definitely shifted, both here and globally. But it wasn't just courts and international bodies pushing this change, right? It was mirrored, maybe even driven, by a big shift in public feeling right here in the U.S. You mentioned a 2003 Harris poll. It showed, 69% opposition to the death penalty for juveniles?
That's significant?
Yeah, it really reflects this growing discomfort, this fundamental unease with the whole idea of executing children.
Yeah.
Okay, so while the death penalty for juveniles is thankfully now off the table in the U.S., constitutionally speaking, what about the broader and maybe equally crucial issue of wrongful convictions, especially for young people? What actually happens after someone is exonerated? It's clearly not just a simple, you're free, good luck kind of situation.
No, not at all. What's truly illuminating here is the severe psychological and practical impact of being wrongfully locked up, even after you're officially cleared. Sources describe individuals feeling this profound sense of being dislocated in time or maybe developmentally frozen. I mean, imagine being a teenager, right? And then suddenly you're released into a world that's moved on decades without you.
Right.
One exoneree, for instance, saw his son, who was just a toddler when he went away, as a grown adult when he got out. And just the technological changes alone, they're often described as the most startling and most challenging issue to deal with.
And then there's that phrase, the Peter Pan shadow of a criminal label. One source called it that. It's such a vivid image. It's a stark reality even for the exonerated, isn't it? What does that actually look like day to day?
Well, finding and keeping a job becomes incredibly difficult. You've got a lack of training, maybe huge gaps in your employment history, and just this lingering negative public perception. Even decades later, that wrongful conviction can slam doors shut for job opportunities.
Wow, decades later.
Yeah. And to make matters worse, many states just don't have compensation laws for wrongful conviction. So exonerees are often left with little more than gate money. A tiny sum based on how many years they served and whatever they managed to save in commissary. They literally come out with, as one put it, nothing but what I went in with. And then there's that ongoing struggle with how people see them. People might think the exoneration was just a technicality or that they somehow slipped through the cracks.
Right. The suspicion lingers.
Exactly. And sometimes police and prosecutors even keep asserting guilt publicly, which just fuels that doubt and makes reintegration incredibly hard. A monumental task, really.
So those are the external hurdles. What about the internal toll? That must be immense.
Oh, absolutely. Beyond those external, just crushing challenges, the internal toll is huge. Exonerees face really significant mental and emotional struggles. Some feel intense survivor's guilt, for being free while others they knew are still locked up or maybe even died in prison. They often grapple with these profound feelings of fear, worthlessness, helplessness, isolation, rejection. It makes it incredibly difficult to even imagine a future or to connect emotionally with people. Some even carry guilt for maybe implicating others during their own ordeal, which just highlights the deep psychological damage that sticks around long after they're released.
And we shouldn't forget the families, right? There's this idea of secondary trauma.
That's right. It's crucial. Close relatives, they can suffer too. Anxiety, depression, they deal with the stigma, the social rejection. Sometimes they even see antisocial or criminal behavior crop up in their own children as a direct result of the whole family's ordeal. It ripples outwards.
Okay, so this deep dive isn't just about the injustices, as critical as those are. It's also about trying to understand why. Why do young people get involved in the justice system in the first place? What does the research tell us about the root causes, the drivers of juvenile delinquency?
What's really striking here is that complex intersection. You've got adolescent development on one hand, and then this whole host of external factors on the other. Youth service providers, people on the ground, they consistently highlight that many crimes committed by young people are impulsive, especially when they're with peers. And they often happen without really thinking through the consequences.
Which makes sense given what we know about brain development.
Exactly. It aligns perfectly with the research on the adolescent brain. Those parts responsible for impulse control, future planning, they're still under construction, basically. So what we might even consider typical youthful behavior, fights, disorderly conduct, maybe some drug experimentation that can unfortunately spiral into significant justice system involvement.
So when we talk about those underlying factors, those pathways,
Right.
what are the key risk indicators? What really increases a young person's likelihood of ending up in the system?
Well, one of the most powerful connections we see is educational experience. Academic failure, being held back a grade, truancy, just general disengagement from school. These are strongly linked. Being grade retained, held back, that's a major red flag. Unexcused absences actually have the largest impact we see in the data. It increases the likelihood of justice system involvement by like 2.64 times for high-risk youth.
Wow, that's specific.
Yeah. And just changing schools frequently, that's 2.21 times. Suspensions, 2.11 times. Also substantial effects. It seems like kids who fall behind or just check out from school often end up with more unsupervised time, right? Which can create a pathway to trouble.
Okay, education is huge. What else? Mental health comes up a lot.
Absolutely critical. Mental health. Justice-involved youth show statistically higher rates of both internalizing disorders.
So things like depression, anxiety.
Exactly. Major depressive disorders, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar, things that mainly affect the person internally. And also externalizing disorders, the ones that impact behavior outwardly. Things like conduct disorders, ADHD, substance use. Those externalizing disorders in particular, they're strongly linked to aggression, maladaptive behavior, lack of impulse control. Sources also really highlight how trauma can put youth into this kind of survival mode. It makes them perceive threats everywhere, react aggressively, maybe leading directly to police interaction.
And the home environment must play a role too.
Oh, undeniably. We can't overlook the family environment. The sources consistently talk about the importance of a competent parent and conversely, the devastating impact of broken homes. Early intervention, even starting way back with prenatal care, is seen as critical because children can start showing unhealthy behaviors as early as 3 to 5 years old, often rooted in underlying trauma, maybe homelessness or family conflict.
And then there's the neighborhood, the community environment.
Right, that plays a huge role. Living on what researchers call hot blocks, areas with high gun violence, that's statistically associated with a 1.44 times greater likelihood of justice involvement. For some kids, being part of a crew might even feel necessary for self-protection, especially in certain neighborhoods. And tied into all this, we also consistently see that histories of childhood maltreatment, neglect, abuse, being in foster care, or other out-of-home placements are linked to later justice involvement.
This list of factors, it also makes me think about those references we saw in the sources to entitled teens or just general defiance. How does that more typical adolescent stuff connect?
That's a good question. Adolescence, by its very nature, it's a time when teens are really yearning for freedom, for autonomy. So if they feel overly controlled or maybe they just don't fully understand the rules being imposed on them, they might naturally push boundaries or break them. It's part of testing limits. Some sources describe this kind of progression of entitlement that can become concerning. It might start with wanting something really intensely, then it moves to believing I must have it, then feeling I should get it, and finally feeling treated unfairly if they're denied. That feeling of unfairness can then escalate to anger, even fury. And certain parental behaviors, like maybe being overly indulgent or always avoiding saying no, can inadvertently foster this kind of progression.
Okay, so we have this incredibly complex web of factors, developmental, social, environmental, that can lead youth into the justice system.
Mm.
How is the system itself responding? Is it still mainly about punishment, or is there a real tangible shift towards rehabilitation, especially recognizing that these are kids we're talking about?
Well, officially, the overriding purpose of the juvenile justice system is explicitly rehabilitation, not punishment. That's the stated goal. It's grounded in recognizing the diminished culpability and the greater capacity for change that are inherent in children. However, there's a recognized and often controversial exception. For juveniles charged with very serious crimes like murder, in some places the focus might still shift towards punishment. And despite that rehabilitative goal, the evidence, frankly, suggests that incarceration itself often makes further delinquent behavior more likely.
So it backfires.
Often, yeah. It significantly harms physical and mental health. It gets in the way of education and future career success. And tragically, it exposes youth to abuse inside facilities, sometimes leading to truly horrific incidents, like those fight clubs reported in some places. What's more, the use of confinement, locking kids up, is severely plagued by racial and ethnic disparities. It seems propelled by systemic bias against youth of color.
That's a really sobering reality check on the system's goals versus its outcomes. So if locking kids up often makes things worse, what are the solutions? What interventions are being tried or proposed to address these challenges, to actually prevent youth from entering or re-entering the system?
Thankfully, there's a growing focus on community-based programs. That seems to be where the momentum is. Strategies include things like youth advocate programs and these credible messenger initiatives.
What are those exactly?
They involve mentoring by adults who often have their own past justice system experience, usually from similar neighborhoods as the kids they're mentoring. They offer really relatable guidance. Intensive family-focused treatments, like multisystemic therapy or MST, are also showing promise by tackling problems within the family and community context.
And what about catching things earlier? You mentioned intervention.
Yes, early intervention is constantly stressed as vital, starting way back, even prenatal care. Programs like Healthy Steps, for example, they integrate child development experts right into pediatric care teams. The idea is to support families from a very early age, spot potential issues before they escalate.
Makes sense. And in schools,
Hmm.
instead of just suspension.
Right. For school-based alternatives, restorative justice is being used more and more. It's an alternative to just kicking kids out via suspension or expulsion. The aim is to actually repair the harm caused by behavior and improve social and emotional development for everyone involved.
Okay, so community programs, early help, school changes. What about diverting kids away from the system altogether?
Exactly. Diversion and prevention efforts are key. Things like the Juvenile Behavioral Diversion Program. It offers intensive case management specifically for youth with mental health concerns, trying to keep them out of the formal court system. Violence interruption initiatives use these community-credible individuals to actually go out and de-escalate conflicts on the streets before they turn violent.
Yeah.
And there's a really strong push now to limit confinement, period. Initiatives like the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative, JDAI, they've significantly reduced detention populations, often over 40% in places that use it, and crucially, without negatively impacting public safety. They do it by emphasizing alternatives.
So it is possible.
It seems so. There's a clear move now to try and prohibit incarceration for lower-level offenses altogether, and to use fiscal incentives, basically, money to encourage states and localities to invest in community-based solutions instead of building or filling residential facilities, shifting resources to where they can actually do the most good.
It's genuinely powerful to hear about the system trying to evolve towards these kinds of solutions and maybe bring this full circle back to the individuals. Despite the unbelievable trauma of wrongful imprisonment, you mentioned some exonerees experience something called post-traumatic growth. What is that?
Yeah, it's a truly remarkable aspect of human resilience, isn't it? It's this idea of a positive transformation that can sometimes happen after extremely traumatic events. It can lead to things like a greater appreciation for life, maybe closer relationships, an increased sense of personal strength, even seeing new possibilities they hadn't envisioned before the trauma. Many exonerees find really profound meaning by getting deeply involved in the innocence movement or broader criminal justice reform, raising awareness, educating others.
Turning pain into purpose.
Exactly. Now, that work can sometimes be re-traumatizing, definitely, but it also provides this powerful sense of purpose, and it helps them connect with other people who truly understand what they've been through. We even hear these stories of people who, while they were still in prison, maintained their sense of self, their identity, by focusing on what they could control, maybe studying law, engaging in their faith. One exoneree put it powerfully: I was a rebel without a cause, and now I'm a rebel with one.
So while the system can just tragically strip away identity and hope,
Mm.
these individuals show it's possible to actively reclaim it, to forge a new meaningful purpose out of just immense hardship. Wow. What a journey we've taken today. There's really complex, often heartbreaking landscape of juvenile justice, from the shocking historical execution of a 14-year-old through the critical shifts in how we understand youth and culpability, all the way to the ongoing battles for exoneration and these systemic efforts to better understand and hopefully rehabilitate young offenders.
Yeah, we've seen how the very definition of child within the justice system has evolved, hasn't it? Driven by compelling psychological insights and a growing global consensus. But we've also seen pretty starkly how the impact of a wrongful conviction casts this incredibly long, persistent shadow. Even after someone is officially exonerated, it highlights these deep systemic flaws and the enduring, painful power of stigma.
Ultimately, I think this deep dive really shows us that justice, especially when it concerns our youth, it isn't some static concept set in stone. It's a living, breathing system. It's shaped by our collective understanding of human development, by our willingness to actually confront past wrongs, and by our unwavering commitment, hopefully, to ensuring that every single young person, regardless of their circumstances, has a fair chance at a just future.
And maybe this leaves us with an important question for you, the listener, to think about. If it's true that a society's level of civilization can be judged by its prisons, by how it treats its most vulnerable, then what does our evolving understanding of juvenile justice and the ongoing challenges faced by those wrongfully convicted as kids tell us about where we truly stand today? And perhaps more importantly, what more do we still need to do?